for that. Hope you've had a chance to look at the minutes for February 10th, 11th, 12th, and 17th. And if you have any questions or if you're ready for a motion, I would take a motion. Senator Warren?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that we approve the minutes as they have been shared with us for the dates that were shared.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Senator Gossage, seconded. Any questions? Any edits or modifications? Very good. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passed. Minutes are approved. Thank you. Before we open up the hearing on 2086, I just wanted to remind the committee that we didn't close the hearing yesterday on 2334 because we're still collecting more information, and we wanted to consider the possibility of having some more testimony next week. So I didn't want you to think we'd closed it and we're not discussing it anymore. We just have a little bit more work to do, so that hearing is still open. All right, very good. Thank you. I was looking for my ag people. You're here now. Thank you. Yes, I totally understand. All right, committee, we are going, one last correction from yesterday. You had a supplemental note that didn't match your folder, so you've got 2047 now in front of you, so you can add that to the appropriate folder, and apologize for that. Okay, we're going to open the hearing now on House Bill 2086. Eileen, would you like to give us a brief on that, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, committee. House Bill 2086 adjusts the KPERS 3 dividend interest credit by lowering the dividend interest credit threshold to 5% and increasing the dividend share to 80%. Section 1 of the bill amends KSA 74-49,306 pertaining to a KPERS 3 members annuity savings account by adjusting the investment return threshold for the dividend interest credit calculation. There's too many alliterative words there. From 6% to 5%, and then increasing the dividend share from 75% to 80%. You can see that on page 2 of the bill in lines 12 and 15. Section 2 of the bill makes the same change to KSA 74-49,308. Pertaining to a KPERS 3 members retirement annuity account, and you can see that change on page 3 in lines 22 and 25. The House Committee on Financial Institutions and Pensions passed the bill out of committee with no amendments, and the House Committee of the Whole passed the bill on a vote of 116 to 5 on February 14th. And with that, Madam Chair, I can stand for questions.
Committee, do you have questions of Eileen? Okay, I'm not seeing any, Eileen. Thank you so much. We will have our first proponent. Shannon, would you like to come forward? I know I saw you. There you are. Introduce yourself, and we've got your testimony in our folder.
Good morning, Chair Dietrich and members of the committee. Pleased to be here this morning. I'm Shannon Campbell. I represent the Kansas Association of School Boards, and we are pleased to appear as proponents on this bill. As many of you know, KASB is a membership organization for the nearly 2,000 school board members across Kansas. We represent 285 school districts in the state. And our members, throughout the last couple of years, as we have gone through our member-led legislative platform process, have brought KPERS improvements and improving the retirement benefits for both teachers and education support staff to the very top of the priorities that we have as an organization. The impact that the KPERS benefit has on our ability both to recruit new teachers and then keep them in the profession throughout their careers here in Kansas is becoming a significant issue. And so as we traveled across the state this year on our legislative listening tour, this is the thing that came up at every single one of those meetings. The feedback we get from our members aligns with the results of the 2024 LPA report on the KPERS 3 plan, which is that it just does not provide the kind of retirement benefit for a lifetime career teacher that they need for it to provide. Improving that benefit would greatly help us in addressing the teacher shortage in Kansas. As you may have heard, State Department of Education in October talked about their data. We have about 1,900 vacancies in teacher positions this school year. That number has increased year over year. We heard stories as we were out talking with our superintendents and board members about young people talking to them about coming into the profession and saying, well, am I going to become a teacher in Kansas or am I going to become a teacher in Oklahoma or Missouri? And having people tell us, well, we're having a hard time counseling them to start their careers here because by the time they finish a 30-year career, their retirement would be so much better in some of our, particularly our surrounding states. We don't want to see us losing good teachers and staff to Missouri and Oklahoma and other states. So we feel like this bill is a very positive first step in addressing the needs that are in KPERS 3 to improve that retirement benefit, and we encourage you to pass it out of committee favorably. Thank you very much, and I would be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you. I think we'll wait for questions until all the proponents are finished with their testimony, but thank you. Next, we have Tim Graham. Tim, I know I saw you. There you are. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Tim Graham. I'm here on behalf of the Kansas National Education Association, the teachers union here in Kansas. As I always do in several pieces of my testimony, I always start out with a little bit of a background of who we are, who we represent, how many members we have. It's here in my testimony. I encourage you to read that. I also like to include our policy positions. We call them resolutions. These are much like the process that you just heard from KASB. Our members come together, they debate policy positions, and they adopt them in a democratic fashion, and it goes into our resolution books. So it's probably no surprise to you that we have several resolutions on KPERS, and I won't read the resolutions, but I would encourage you to do so. You know, I've said this, what I'm about to say, I've said this several times in testifying, so you guys may have already heard this, but it seems like there are two things in this building as it relates to this issue that we all seem to agree on. One of them is that teacher shortages are real in Kansas, and the other one is that KPERS Tier 3 needs to be improved. And I thought last year was the year that it was going to happen. Unfortunately, this issue, there were a lot of people on both sides of the aisle that were very excited about doing something last year, and this issue just kind of got hijacked. That's just the way this process works, right? So here we are again this year, and we're still asking that you guys do something to improve Tier 3, and we're calling on to do so for the same reasons that you just heard. The teacher shortages, we think that this can be a good tool in helping the teacher shortages in recruitment and retention. We don't have any hard data to suggest that that's going to take place because we haven't done polling on that, right? We also know that young professionals don't necessarily look at the retirement benefits early in their career, but they start looking at these retirement. What I've read is that a lot of people start looking at their retirement at about the age of 30 or 31. That's kind of what I've read online and in other articles. And so if that's the case, we are getting to the point where a lot of these teachers that just started after Tier 3 started in 2015 that are getting to that age of about 31, 32, and you know, older, or in that age range, are they going to look at their retirement plan and just flee the profession and then just exacerbate this problem we have with teacher shortages? I think that is not a argument that should be considered the sky is falling. I think that's probably a pretty reasonable argument that we're going to start having teachers in that phase of their career that are going to be looking at their retirement plans, and they're possibly going to try to jump to another career, and that's going to cause us problems. But let's say, for the sake of argument, that you don't believe any of that, right? That you don't believe that fixing Tier 3 is going to be the silver bullet. So we want to try to appeal to you for a couple other reasons. Common sense would suggest that a competitive retirement plan will aid in teacher recruitment. Retirement benefits are widely used as incentives in the private sector. So again, I think if it works in the private sector, it could work in the teaching profession. Two, I would love for you guys to look at this with some historical perspective. KPERS Tier 3, or I'm sorry, I've been around long enough to remember that when KPERS Tier 1 was considered an excellent retirement plan. Many teachers entered the profession knowing they would earn lower salaries than their private sector counterparts, but found reassurance in the promise of a dignified and comfortable retirement. Tier 3 doesn't necessarily provide a dignified and comfortable retirement plan. And then let's just talk about fairness. Teaching is unique. It's unique, it's critical, in a noble profession. Educators serve the public, often accepting lower salaries while facing increasing demands, stagnating wages, and classroom challenges. Many teachers even spend their own money to supply their classrooms. Amidst these challenges, ensuring educators a secure retirement is simply the right thing to do. So we ask you guys to pass this bill, and we also would like to say that please don't see this as a final solution, but just a first step. We understand the challenges you all face. Everybody is coming to you and asking for things. Those things cost money. We understand that we can't do everything in 1 year, but we would like to see an incremental approach to improving Tier 3 to a way that we can advocate that Tier 3 is a good retirement plan for our educators. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Tim. We'll hope you'll stick around, so if we have questions, you'll be available when we're finished with our proponent testimony. Next, we have Lori Greenfield. Lori, are you in the room? No?
Lori Greenfield is one of our members, and her daughter is having a baby this morning, so.
Oh, wow. Well, that's
To say she's not here.
I think we're glad she's not here, but we've got her testimony in our folder, committee. And then I guess I would ask, are there any more proponents in person? I don't believe there are. We do have written proponent testimony in our folder, and we do have neutral testimony. But before we move on to neutral testimony, do you have any questions, committee, of Tim or Shannon, the two proponents, Senator Rose and Senator Warren?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is for either of you that want to take it. Can you give us specific numbers, apples to apples, a teacher that is, say, currently retired on Capers 1, say they are retired when they're 60 after 30 years of service, and how much money they make in retirement pension compared to a teacher on Capers 3 as it stands right now, and also on Capers 3 with the changes you're proposing?
I think that might be the Capers staff who can best answer that.
Okay.
Because they've got the data. Can we hold off on that question? I think, do you have the data, and are you willing to step up, Jared or Alan? Okay. Okay, sure. Senator Warren, did you have a question, or was it along the same lines?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is a little bit technical on the agenda. So we have on our agenda that Capers is a proponent of the bill. Is that correct?
That is correct. Oh, I'm sorry, they're neutral. I'm sorry, it's correct on my agenda, the one I'm looking at.
Okay, so Capers is neutral on the bill.
They're going to provide some testimony for us to answer some questions.
Great, and then just a comment that it's a good day to be hearing a bill such as this, because we have our Kansas Association of School Boards here, as well as representative for some of our teachers, because later today we will be honoring the 7 Kansas master teachers on the Senate floor. And I know they're in the building, and they have a busy itinerary this morning, being they're meeting the governor and other full activity until 2:30 on the floor. So it's a teacher kind of day up here. My question is for Mr. Graham. There are other teacher unions other than KNEA in Kansas, correct? I think Blue Valley has its own teachers union. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm not real sure what Blue Valley has. I know they have their own association. I don't know if it would be considered a teachers union. We do have another union in the south central part of the state, Wichita, and that is AFT. But we have a shared local with them. So even though they're at the national level, they're a separate union here in Kansas. We have a joint local in the Wichita area.
Is it a requirement that all teachers in Kansas be part of a union?
No, we're a right-to-work state, so that would be prohibited.
That's what I thought. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And as a reminder, Capers will be neutral testimony. Sorry about the agenda. Mine says neutral, but I think yours do not. Yeah, very good. Okay. So while we're, are you ready, Ellen, to give your testimony? And then we've still got Senator Rose's question we want to answer. So we have written proponent testimony in your folder, but Capers is here today as neutral. So Ellen, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and that's correct. Capers leaves it up to the wisdom of the body in terms of benefit enhancements, and so we're here to provide information in terms of the cost and implementation of that. And I don't know if you'd like me to respond to Senator Rose's question now. That's right. So Capers 1 and 2, traditional defined benefit plan prior to Capers 3, the retirement replacement ratio, which is kind of one of the markers we use in terms of replacing active salary once they retire. For a Capers 2 member, which is very similar to Capers 1, that would, for a 30-year member, I think you mentioned that, their retirement replacement ratio would be 51%. And Capers 3, as you'll hear, is about 33%, I think it is. So it's different plan design, different structure by design. When it was implemented, certainly it was designed to cost less for the employer, and it's certainly done that since 2015. That responds to your question?
Thank you. We're ready for your testimony.
All right, thank you. Then we'll switch, and I think you have my testimony, and I neglected to attach an attachment A, which relates to those retirement replacement ratios, and so anyway, so that is being handed out right now, and I'll discuss that in a second. So again, you've heard about Capers 3 since 2015. It's called a cash balance risk-sharing plan, and that's one of the ways, difference from 1 and 2, some of that risk was shifted. 1 and 2, all of the risk, investment risk, is all on the employer. Capers 3 shares that between the member and the employer, and that's by design. Technically still a defined benefit plan, but there's this risk-sharing element. Capers 3 members contribute 6%, as they do in Capers 1, 2, and 3. All of the contributions, employer and employee, all go into the same Capers Trust Fund, so it doesn't make any difference whether there's 1, 2, or 3. We do keep track of Capers 3 members. It's called a notational account, which is, it's there in the database, but it's not like a 401k. It's separate for that, and the benefit structure then uses that notational account to eventually help determine retirement benefits. So Capers 3 members earn, from the employer, they earn pay credits, and that little table there on the sort of lower right of the first page of my testimony, you can see it's based on years of service, goes from 3% up to 6%. This is different than the employer contribution. The employer contribution is the same for 1, 2, and 3. A large part of that, again, relates to the unfunded actuarial liability out of the employer contribution, which is around 11, 12%. Capers 3 members are guaranteed to receive 4% interest on their accounts, both the pay credit side and their contribution side, what the employer puts in. So they're guaranteed that, and then they can earn, this is sort of the upside on the risk sharing, dividend interest credits may be applied if the 5-year average return exceeds 6%. We'll talk about that more in a second. And then once they get to retirement age, then that notational account is annuitized into a lifetime benefit. I mean, 3 attributes of Capers 3, of course, unlike a 401k, the member never loses what they put into it. They're guaranteed that 4% interest crediting, and they are guaranteed that a lifetime retirement benefit. On page 2 then just talks about that calculation of that dividend interest crediting. Again, it's 75% of the 5-year average above 6%. And so each year the board looks at that, does that calculation in the table in the top right there. You can kind of look through the years and see whether or not a dividend credit was added to the KPERS 3 notational accounts. So you can see that. And let's see, so again, anyway, you can see kind of through the years of over the first 9 years of the cash balance plan, the dividend credit increase or has been paid 5 of those nine times. And you can just see that there's an example there to the left of that table. So if we assumed the return was 8%, so minus 6%, so that's 2% times 75% gets you to a dividend credit of 1.55%. So this bill then turns one of the dials then on the KPERS 3, which is that dividend interest credit. It increases that dividend share rather than 80%, or from 75% up to 80%. It lowers the threshold when that would kick in. Currently at 6%, would take it down to 5%. So that new formula then would be 80% of the 5-year average return above 5%. And there's an example there. So up above is 1.5%. With this threshold, that dividend credit as proposed in the bill would be 2.4%. And of course, higher dividend credits result in higher KPERS 3 account balances, which eventually will lead to higher retirement benefits for the KPERS 3 members. The actuary estimates, again, a 30-year career member would see their replacement ratio increase from 33% for a KPERS 3 member to 36%. And then we just did an example on the dollar side. So under the current plan, a 30-year employee had a salary of final salary of $60,000. Their current estimated annual benefit would be about $19,900. This would increase it to $21,900. So in this specific example, it would increase their annual benefit by about $2,000 or 10%. The retirement replacement ratio, and that was the document that was just passed out. You can see the comparison. And again, these examples are so sort of member specific. So is it a career employee, 30 years? Did they have 10 years? Did they come early in their working career and then left, but left their money? Or did they join mid-career for 20 years? Or did they come towards the end of their working career in their last 20 years, where maybe with a public service agent? And again, you can see the variation in that. The orange bar is the current KPERS 3 with this current interest dividend credit in the statute. And then here's some examples should those dials be changed as proposed in 20 Bill 86. So it improves the benefit, and of course that means then there's cost that goes along with that. And so on page 3 talks about the actuarial costs for improving the benefit. And so certainly there would be some cost. And so for the state school group, the unfunded actuarial liability is estimated to increase a little over $100 million. And of course, you all could pay that up front. Pay KPERS does not impact the unfunded liability. That would pay the cost for granting this benefit for all those employees that have started since 2015 to get us to this point. So that's on the unfunded liability. That could either be paid in one time or it could be amortized over 20 years. It's 0.13% on the employer contribution, so about $7 million a year on the state school. And of course, as you probably remember, the state pays the entire school employer contribution for KPERS as part of state aid to local school districts. And then there's the normal cost. And so that's kind of from this point forward for current active people. It would increase the employer contribution rate by about 0.3%, which is about $20 million a year. And so if you wrote KPERS a check for the $100 million, the normal cost would be the ongoing cost of this increased enhancement, which again would be about $20 million a year. Or if you want to amortize both the unfunded actuarial liability impact and the ongoing costs, you can see there it'd be about $27 million a year for the state school contribution, and about 0.48% on the employer contribution. There's similar impacts on the local there as set out in page 3. There it would, if you amortize the unfunded liability, would increase about 43 million. The normal cost would be about 12 million a year, and of course that's spread over over 1,400 local KPERS members. And as indicated by Elaine, the House had passed this 115-6, and certainly be pleased to respond to any questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Committee, questions? Lots of great information. Thank you for giving us different scenarios. That's always very informative and lets us kind of put a face on the information. Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Alan, thank you for your presentation. Could you give us a little history of how 1, 2, and 3 evolved and kind of what the thought process was?
Certainly KPERS 1, the true defined benefit plan, started when KPERS started back in the 60s. And so it's the true defined benefit formula of final average salary times years of service times the multiplier. Currently for KPERS, it's 1.85%. So that started in the 60s. Of course, school group joined in the 70s, but that basic formula, the multiplier was adjusted through the years, but that formula stayed through until KPERS 2 was created in 2009, I guess it was, yeah. And so, at that point, again, there was concerns about the funding position of KPERS at that time, and so there was some changes to the benefit structure. Probably the biggest one was KPERS 1 members still have an 85-point plan, which is age and years of service. Whenever they get to 85 points, they're eligible for normal retirement. And that, from an actuarial standpoint, is kind of pricey. And so to help minimize the cost, KPERS 2 was created. That 85-point plan fell out. There were increased employee contributions, increased employer contributions as well, trying to increase the strength of KPERS. Then along comes KPERS 3 in 2015. Again, there was, of course, there are two big downturns in the market, 2001-ish, 2008, 2009. The funded ratio, KPERS falls. Collectively, the state for 25 years paid less than what it was supposed to. So in all those years, the actuary said that employer contribution rate should be at this certain level for 25 years. The legislature set a lower rate. Doesn't go away, that difference. It just rolls to the unfunded liability. We're currently charging 7%, and so that unfunded liability went pretty high, and it's over $9 billion totally for the entire system, over $6 billion for the KPERS school. So I guess those changes, KPERS 2 and KPERS 3, were done to minimize, I think, one, to strengthen the system, the underlying funding system of KPERS, the funding position of KPERS, and then to maybe minimize some of the costs, particularly for KPERS 3, as you look down the road as KPERS 1 and KPERS 2 members retire and are replaced by KPERS 3. Long answer to your question, sorry.
So the one piece of that, Alan, there was a period of time that the legislators were not funding that properly. Would you say that?
Yes, 25 years.
It's 25 years that we unfunded that thing, and that's what happened with that. So that kind of builds to where we're at today, you know, kind of thing. Question I just came up with, in our court-ordered formula for education funding, was KPERS part of that formula?
And there's some very knowledgeable people here in the room.
Graham, you know that question?
I will say, I do know, I think from a previous life, there was lots of concern in those different court cases on school finance through the years, whether or not the court was really taking into account all of the state effort on the Capers school side. And so one of the changes that I'm aware of, the legislature at the time, and I think it's still in place, requires the State Department of Education gets the Capers school contribution. They send it out to each of the districts, has to go into a separate account, lockbox, can't be spent for anything else, and then the school districts, so it touches the school district's budget, and then the next day, it has to be forwarded on to Capers. But again, some other people may have some more perspectives, but that's my understanding of that school finance part.
So the comment that I make, Madam Chairman, we all want to do, I would love to do Capers 1, just for everybody. The problem is, what can you afford? And so everybody likes to play Santa Claus. Ever since I've been up here, every year we've been in here on enhancements, every year that I'm aware of. Last year we went from 4,000 to 6,000 for death benefits. What was the fiscal note on that, Alan? Do you know what that was? Which I thought was a pretty good number, but I can't remember either. So, I mean, there's an example of enhancement. So we keep doing these enhancements, but as we go through and look at these budgets of what we're doing, this is tough. This is tough. So if somehow maybe we cut down on enhancements to kind of help us, somewhere to offset that. If you think wages are important, you think retirement's important, and kind of factor that in. But my biggest problem is, the last I knew, we were 9.6 to 9.7 billion on unfunded liabilities. Billion. That's the largest contingent liability the state has, is that number right there. So when we go changing this, the question is, how do we pay this? Where do we go? And my focus has sure been on to make sure that the check's always there in the same amount that you're obligated to. That's my number one thing. And I want to work on the unfunded liability, because when you say this 9.6, 9.7 and say, well, we're making progress, well, the piece we haven't put in there is that we went and borrowed money to put into this. We owe $1.5 billion on that, so you add the $1.5 billion to the 9.6 and then figure out where you're at. So this, I'm just describing where we're at today with this kind of thing. So I hear what you're saying. I wish we could do this. I'm just one that until we get that number down, and if we want to get serious about that, we take some money and put it down in cash into the Capers program. I said $1 billion, I'd go $500 million if we could. That's the kind of thing we need to be doing to help that problem. So thank you.
Thank you. So one of the things, and you mentioned this yourself, that we're struggling with is that there were 25 years of deficiencies in payments from the state. The state did not live up to their obligation. So that's where our unfunded liability came from. And so we're in the process now of trying to make the world a better place for our state employees, not just teachers, but anybody who's in Tier 3. And so, as I think one of our proponents said, this does not solve the problem. It just is a step in the right direction. So we have made some large payments over the years to pay down that unfunded actuarial liability. We just have not gotten it to where it needs to be. Now, don't you have a chart, Mr. Conroy, that you may not have it with you, but shows if we continue to make the required payments, that we will have paid down that unfunded liability? Is it maybe 2033?
2039 now.
2039.
The amortization, that large unfunded liability currently would be paid off in 2030.
Great. And that's with no additional payments. So Senator Francisco, you had a question?
My question would just be that we are asking these Capers members in Tiers 3 to pay 6% of their salary, and then we're guaranteeing them a 4% return. So I think just thinking about those two numbers makes me feel that we shouldn't offer this if it doesn't have a better benefit.
Questions for, oh, Alan, did you want to?
I was just going to say,
Sorry.
and paying that required amount, now for the last 7 years, the collective wisdom of the legislature and the governor have been to pay that required amount on the employer contribution. So headed in the right direction, and I think our actuary says that's the key to long-term appropriate funding is to pay what you're supposed to. And that's happily happened at least this last 7 years.
Thank you. Questions? Senator Cluse.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just trying to get a perspective on this in light of the House vote on this particular bill. And so can you tell me, so how long have we been paying this again? And I know we put in $1 billion towards that unfunded liability. How long have we been consistent? How many years?
Yes, paying the actuarial required amount would be those 7 years. There have been some additional cash payments into the Capers Fund, and then there have been, I guess, 3 pension obligation bonds. We got the proceeds, states paying the debt service on that. But 7 years paying what's required.
And just to add on to that, it started 7 years ago because we were no longer deficit spending, and we had surplus dollars that allowed us to be able to do that. So many of you sitting around the table, well, 3 of us were here at that time, but the rest were not. That was a pretty huge issue. Yeah. Senator Fack.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a couple of quick things I want to throw I forgot about. Right now, we stand at the second highest in 20 years when you look at this whole package. Second highest in 20 years of unfunded liability issues and what we owe in debt. You know, when you put those two together. And when we look out to what Alan said at 2039, that's based a lot on what the stock market's going to do. Now, you tell me what the stock market's going to do when you go look every day with what's going on, and that concerns me. So that's where being able to pay down on this thing is so vitally important. Thank you.
Senator Argabright, did you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm supportive of this, and I think a lot of people around here are. If we just can't disrupt the structure of this fund. And I'm getting the feel that, yes, it's a step in the right direction, and I'm willing to do that, but it may be our only shot because of the things you're hearing around here. So is this the best shot we have, and is this the right structure? Because I do agree with some testimony and from experience when our young people start to raise a family or have a young family, they are looking forward, whether it's public or private. That is relative. And our salaries are not, in the education, are not as good as the business world in most cases, and that's the risk. And a pension does help keep people in place. So very encouraged of the conversation. I just want to make sure we get it right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Warren.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the conversation, too. Just wanted to clear up the record. There were 4 of us who have been here for the last 7 terms to help with the unfunded liability.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you very much.
Me as well, so thank you.
Senator Rose.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is it okay if I ask a question of the proponents?
Oh, yes, for sure.
Thank you. There's a discussion going on currently about merit-based pay for teachers. And in your testimony, you talked about teacher retention and recruiting teachers. And I was just wondering what your opinion is if we offered merit-based pay for teachers in Kansas instead of enhancing the retirement benefit.
That's kind of off our topic, and that might be a better question for the Education Committee. Are you willing to answer that? This is about capers, not about merit pay. That's a little off topic, but why don't you ask him that question offline? That would be great. And okay. We really need to stay on the capers topic. Any new information you'd like to provide? And by the way, Senator Fack, I don't disagree with you, but that's really a Ways and Means discussion because they allocate the dollars and you're on Ways and Means. So.
And it is just a suggestion,
Okay.
yeah.
Did you have something more to add?
I do. Thank you, Madam
Okay.
Chairman. I just wanted to, when we did 2015, we did these adjustments because it was broke. We couldn't afford it. So that third, tier 3, if you go back and look and see what unfunded liability was at that time versus where we are today, we haven't gained much ground in this thing. Now, we could debate that part of it too. But when you go to work for the state or whoever that's got capers, you get a deal that tells about the three-legged approach to retirement. One of them is Social Security, one of them will be this, and then the other one is third personal savings. And if you use all three of them deals, you will be very well when you retire. We all have choices in life, is what I would say to you. And if you make the right choices on those, we know what the two legs are. One's got a COLA, one doesn't. But I know a lot of people that I think's very well off today because of that. So just my 2 cents throw into that too. Thank you.
Okay. Any more discussion on the topic? Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is for Alan. You know, we're talking about, I'm a former teacher, but also I'm in Tier 3. And I think most of us are, because when you came in, anyway, it was for me, and my last term, that was your only choice, was Tier 3, and I think that's the way it is for new teachers, et cetera. However, when we're talking about private and we're talking about public, most of the private industries now have 401ks. So we're kind of comparing apples and oranges, aren't we?
You're certainly correct on the private side. Most major employers have switched to a 401k type plan, yes.
So I'm wondering if the teachers themselves might be more interested in a 401k, and I know that this was the legislature's attempt at some form of a 401k, though it truly is not a 401k. Am I right? Can you explain that?
That is correct. It's got some attributes of a 401k. It's still technically, from actuarial, from funding, it's still a defined benefit plan, cash balance plan, it's called. But again, a 401k, all of that investment risk rests with the individual. In a defined benefit plan, 1 and 2, all of the investment risk rests with the employer. So if the market goes down, it's the employer then, through higher employer contributions, that has to make up that shortfall. KPERS 3, it's a hybrid. There's some risk sharing between the employer and the employee, but it's not. It's kind of in between the traditional KPERS 1, KPERS 2 defined benefit plan and a 401k, like in the private sector.
If I may, Madam Chair, when I'm looking on page 2 of your testimony, and we see in 2015, of course, this small rate of return, but then as the years started to progress, and we saw 7.1, and then you show the dividend credit, and that would be because not only do they receive the 7%, but because it went over the 6% base, then they would receive an additional, or am I reading that wrong?
It'd be an additional,
Goes on top of the 4%. And also, we heard earlier the question about this, or a comment about the 6% of the individual's salary and the 4% return, but that's, again, apples and oranges, correct?
That's right. The 6% is what the employee, all KPERS 1, 2, and 3 contribute towards their retirement. The guaranteed 4% then is part of that benefit structure in KPERS 3, that guaranteed 4%.
The rate of return of the large bulk of the money. Those are my questions. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Any other questions? It's been a great, robust discussion. So thank you. I just want to remind you one more time, you've got written testimony in your folder. And at this point in time, it went a little bit longer than I planned, but we will close the hearing on, well, I guess I need to ask, are there any more neutrals in the audience? Are there any opponents in the audience? Okay, if not, we will close the hearing on House Bill 2086. I do want to try and have a quick hearing on 2087 because this is a bill we've already heard, we've already passed out, and you will recognize it. Eileen, could you give us a quick brief on that? Fiduciary? I'm sorry, that is not one we've heard before. Let's not do this because probably going to need more information on that. How about we take a look at Work House Bill 2044? That one we've heard. And that's what passed out of, You want to do 2045? Okay, 2045, date change. Are you flexible? I'm feeling flexible today. Let's just move ourselves along here. 2045 doesn't have any amendments on it that we know, so we will take a look at that. 2045. You want to give us a quick brief on that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. House Bill 2045 is the House version of our Senate Bill 20. It's the board's bill that would grant the Commissioner of Insurance the ability to decrease the number of board members serving on boards for which the Commissioner is appointing authority. Essentially, we've heard the bill before, and the House Committee on Insurance passed the bill out of committee with no amendments, and the House Committee of the Whole passed the bill 104-10.
Committee, do you have any questions? Senator Gossage?
Madam Chair, I fully understand, having served on some of these boards, it's very hard to get that many people together, and it is a very large board, and plus it can be unwieldy when you have a board that large, so I'm fully supportive of this, and I move we pass out House Bill 2045.
We may want to consider changing the date on this one.
Very important.
Would you want to maybe amend that?
I'd be happy to do that.
Okay.
Madam Chair, there's an amendment to change from the statute book to the Kansas Register, and I would move that amendment.
We have a motion to amend this to change the publication date to the Kansas Register. Second? Senator Fagg seconds. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, back on the bill. Thank you, Senator Gossage. Now I will take that other motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that we pass out House Bill 2045 as amended favorably.
You've heard the motion. Do we have a second? Senator Argerbright? Almost couldn't pronounce your name there for a second. Senator Argerbright seconds. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. That's all we've got time for. Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd quickly like to introduce my pages that came into the room today. So I'll ask them to stand when I call their name. Taylor Martin, Anna Sloan, and then I haven't had a chance to talk to Elizabeth and get her pronunciation of her last name, but Ragakis. And I'm very pleased to have them here. They went and got copies of the bills, and I'm sure they're going to start thinking about their retirement before they are 31.
Welcome. Welcome to committee. Thank you so much for being here. Committee adjourned. Thank you.